You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where it is T20 mayhem today as we dive into England's series v Sri Lanka. We dive into the T20 Blast and we have a little bit of a chat about the West Indies who are taking on South Africa. I'm Jack Hope and today I'm joined by Max Rowe Brown. How are you doing, Max Rowe Brown?
Hello, Jack. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Had a nice break down in Wales this weekend. Nice change of scenery from the inside of my bedroom. So that was nice.
After that pastoral trip to the countryside, are you excited for some T20 mayhem?
Yeah, I had it cruelly taken away from me by virtue of being away. So I'm happy to be back in the
game. Yeah, and we're joined by Nakul Pande. How are you doing, Nakul?
Not too bad, Jack Hope. Yeah, excited for what we call in this the Blast, the Super Smash, the Ram Slam. What are we going with?
The Cricket Podcast Premier League.
Excellent.
It's
TCPPL.
Yeah. It's not the easiest acronym, but it is Premier, and it is a league. We're going to kick off the show with a question, boys, and because we are talking about T20 cricket all day today. The question we will be asking is, what is your favourite thing about T20 cricket? Max, and I'm going to ask you that first as you're on the show every week.
Oh, thank you very much. I think for me, it's the accessibility. And that's in different ways. You've got the accessibility to slightly more casual cricket fans. They can come along of a Thursday, Friday evening after work and take in some cricketing action. That's good. There's accessibility from my point of view in that I don't have to take a day off work to go and watch it. So that's good. And the accessibility of beer from the bar when you go and watch T20 as well.
The three accessibility criteria by which all successful EDI projects are judged. Well done, Max. Nakul, same question to you. What's your favourite thing about T20 cricket?
I mean, it does feel, to be honest, like a beer in terms of just density per bar would actually be easier at a Test match or a 4-day game. But there we go. A bit more kind of serious and global in the fact that it's T20's been the way by which cricket has globalised itself and to some extent democratised itself. It's unfortunate in a way that it's been left to do that by itself, and that can sometimes mean that the globalisation and the democratisation of cricket beyond the existing powers can sometimes get looked at a bit sniffily because it's tied up with T20, but it has done a better job of providing resources and impetus for smaller nations and for smaller counties, for example, and smaller setups within countries. It has been a growth vehicle for women's cricket. And in all of those cases, it can't be left to be the only one, but at least it's something. And it's the only legitimate or proper means by which I can see cricket getting into the Olympics, which will be a major spur for global development. So as a force for cricket spreading itself around the world, I think T20 has been a necessary but not sufficient development.
There we are. They're both two good answers. What I like about it is it's a completely different game to Test cricket. So it's like Test cricket is the resource there is wickets. T20 cricket is an efficiency game. So you can look at it from a completely different point of view, and a lot of people don't, which makes us sound clever on this podcast sometimes. So purely from a selfish point of view, it does give us a little niche sometimes. I also like in this country how, even though the game has developed into something more serious, that a lot of the coverage of it is a little bit lighter. I don't know if anyone saw the video that we tweeted this week of the man at Lord's who was drunk with his girlfriend.
Yes.
Okay, that was his partner.
I'm assuming that's what was happening
right
there, because she was being quite affectionate with him as well.
Yeah, that takes on a really quite alarming tone if that is someone he didn't know.
If you haven't seen it, head over to our Twitter. There's a 6-second video of a man biting a woman's breast midway through a Middlesex cricket match. And you don't get that at Test cricket, frankly, do you? Max, do we have any messages for our listeners?
Yes, apart from going and watching the that little snippet of cricketing history, you should
At the Cricket Pod.
like and subscribe to this podcast, this video, whatever platform you're on. Follow us at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram, and if you're feeling generous, head over to our Patreon and see if if you feel like supporting what we do. That would be hugely appreciated. I don't know whether there's been any movement, Jack, on our latest.
We are still
stats.
we're still on 12. We
we're seeing
broke
off the new
through
ball.
into double figures, and now we are struggling to press on and head towards sort of 20s and a real start, I'd say. Good introduction, boys. Should we just get straight into the cricket instead of having a break? How about that?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the England v Sri Lanka T20 series then. Going back to the first T20 series, what we're going to do for the listener at home is summarise each game, talk a little bit about each game and maybe some of the bigger themes that we observed, move on to the next one. Chronologically, like we normally do. We should be able to handle this, I think, as a three. We'll start with the first T20. Which was a bit of a tone setter, unfortunately, for the rest of the series. Sri Lanka, they batted first and went, nowhere particularly quickly, to be honest, as they finished on a score of 129 for 7. Curiously, they decided to bat first after winning the toss. I think there was a stat going around that the last 8 T20s in England have been won by the side chasing. So I'm not sure that was the wisest tactic. And their score of 129 for 7 was a little bit on the low side. Kusal Pereira and Shanaka made 30 and 50, although both did it at a strike rate of below 120. The England bowlers, meanwhile, they shared around the wickets. And when it came to the second innings, the chase, England did at least entertain a little bit. They chased down the score of 129, so they needed 130 to win in just 17 overs, or in 17 overs. It wasn't just 17 overs, with Butler finishing on 68, including hitting 1-6 into the river. I did struggle to think of what the big stories from this game were. I mean, I don't want to just go over and over, labouring the point that I didn't think Sri Lanka were very good. So why don't we kick off with some discussions around this England squad and who didn't make the team, Max?
Yeah. So who would you refer to specifically there, Jack, in terms of who wasn't making the team?
One of the things that I did want to talk about on this show was sort of the absence of Moeen Ali in this series and in the India series. And I thought, I don't think anyone was massively shocked that England were better than Sri Lanka. I think the margin by which England were better maybe surprised some people. But it felt to me like it would have been a nice opportunity to maybe see some guys like Moeen Ali perform in different roles. I know we got to see Liam Livingstone up the top of the order, but for my money, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, Nakul, I would rather see Moeen Ali up the top of the order for England.
I think there's room to have done both of those things at a point in this series, particularly once Butler was going to miss the second and third T20 internationals. You've moved Bairstow up the order, you've got a space in the middle order. England's conception of Moeen Ali seems to be completely different from how every other team sees him. Every other team, and I include, it's not just the Blast now, it's top-level T20 teams like Chennai Super Kings, see him as a top-order batter. Someone who can take down spinners at any stage of the innings, someone who is good when the field is up, good when the field is back, and someone who can give impetus to an innings pretty much at any stage, and is actually better with more balls to spare, and it is not just a finisher and not an all-rounder, really, in that sense. He'll bowl a few overs, mostly in the power play, which is useful, occasionally a little bit in the middle. England seems to still have this conception of him as the second spinner who can smash a few, which seems a little bit counterintuitive not counterintuitive, counterfactual, I think is probably a better way of putting it. If you look at actually how he's been playing and how he's been used really well by Worcestershire, and perhaps more relevantly for international cricket by CSK, then when he does come in for the final T20, he's batting in the lower middle order or in the middle order, and then bowling one basically token over at the end. So, and if they're looking ahead to India, or to the UAE now, where we know that that open secret has been confirmed now that the T20 World Cup will be in the UAE. He'll just have come off a second half of the IPL where he'll have been batting 3 and 4 for CSK on those pitches. And if England then decide to use him in the middle order or not at all, that would seem curious, particularly if he has a second half of the IPL like he had the first half, where he was really excellent for CSK and a major force in why they were so good in that first part of the IPL.
Yeah.
So it was curious. I think Liam Livingstone getting a chance again. The problem is everyone wants to bat in the top 4. Everyone wants to bat in the top 4, and that's how you make your runs in domestic cricket, because it's very difficult to make an impression in the lower middle order because of the standard. It's just how it goes. Even in the IPL, unless you're Kieran Pollard or Andre Russell, you're not making that much of an impression at 5 and 6. And this T20 series has been much the same. England's middle order only got a bat because the slog was on in the third T20, and even then it was very limited. So you're not really learning all that much, and I don't like coming out of series in that chin scratchy way. So what did we learn? Like it's a game, it's a series. You play and you play to win. Like that. Morgan wants to build this ruthless winning mentality, and this series has been part of that. But I was disappointed from that, not just from a selfish point of view, but from a team development point of view. It kind of feels like if you want the second spinner who can bowl a bit and bat a bit, Liam Dawson's your answer. And if you want a second spinner to bowl 4 overs, Matt Parkinson's your answer. We didn't see Dawson in this series, and they decided Parkinson better off playing the Blast, which is fair enough, I guess. But yeah, that would be the one thing that I would say. That and the death bowling. But I think that problem kind of half takes care of itself when Archer's back.
Yes, I mean, I go a little bit further with Mo and Ali, and specifically on the bowling point. I think he basically provides insurance against teams picking loads of left-handers against England because he bowls off spin. Like he doesn't actually. The reason he doesn't bowl is because teams don't stack their lineup like that, because there's, he is actually quite a good off spinner against left-handed batting. So it means you can't really structure up in that way. And on top of that, I think, I know everyone wants to bat at the top of the order for England, but Mo and Ali, I think, has a better record at a better level than most of the guys who, actually are there. I mean, Max, Ben Stokes or Mo and Ali. If you were, who are you going to take for your franchise?
Well, exactly. I think what you mentioned just then, Nakul, kind of it hits the nail on the head really for me, in that the way he's played for CSK and how valuable CSK saw him to spend the money that they did to bring him in, and how important they saw him as part of their team to do what he does at the top of the order. I think why can England not look at that and take note of it? Because I mean, even you can even talk about David Malan, who obviously was rated like number 1 T20 batsman in the world last year. I don't know if he still is. Those metrics often don't take into account strike rate and things like that. And we've spoken about that before, in that he can be a bit slow to get going. And you might even be better off saying, why not bat Moeen Ali at 3? He can be in there as just that batsman on his own, and then you can have him as an option to bowl extra overs if it all goes wrong as well. So I think he's very underappreciated in this country by followers of England, and clearly England themselves. The only question I would have, maybe as a counterpoint to sort of reflect what you just said, Jack, about having him in there as insurance when teams pick a load of left-handers. Do you think England are thinking, maybe we've got too many left-handers, we can't pick Moeen Ali as well?
But no, I don't. I mean, they might think that, but I think that Moeen Ali's status as a batter gets him in the team, regardless of the bowling.
Well, and also in the first choice top 3, you've got Roy, Butler, and Bairstow. Sorry, in the top 4. So there's 3 left-handers in the top 4. There, with probably Malan will probably keep his place, but it's either Malan, Stokes, or Moeen. So it's left-hander whichever way you go. Then you've got Morgan. Stokes will play in some capacity, and to be fair, I've said on this show and others, Ben Stokes I don't think is an elite T20 player, but when he gets going, he's almost impossible to stop. And he's shown, and he has, for sure.
Is it worth having him in there though? It's just in case he gets going. You're taking a bit.
Well,
of a
I think you can. There's enough consistency in the rest of the lineup that I think you probably, particularly if he's batting in the top, he probably can't bat in the middle order. So Ben Stokes probably has to bat 3. The problem is David Malan also has to bat 3.
I think this is one of those situations where if cricket were played by people, by robots who were numbers, who basically produce numbers, Ben Stokes wouldn't be in the team. But because cricket is played by humans, he is in the team.
Partly because Pro Evo names, make them all anonymous.
Well, no, but partly because there's more to it than that, isn't there? Partly
he's got an aura. He's got an aura.
Yeah, you are both alluding to the fact that he can do miraculous stuff. But also because he is, obviously very well respected by the other players in that team. They obviously rate his talent very highly. The coaches he works with obviously rate him very highly. He's excellent in both of the other formats. He's the sort of cricketer that Shane Warne would moan about if he wasn't in the England team because he scares bowlers. On the Shane Warne metric of fear, Ben Stokes probably ranks quite highly. And whether that's necessarily a reputation earned in T20 cricket or not, it probably is true. There probably are bowlers out there who are scared of bowling to Ben Stokes, and maybe that is worth something in and of itself. We've managed to quite adroitly here not talk at all about the first T20. So I don't know if we want to, because there will be time for Ben Stokes conversations later in the summer, I think. So I don't know if there's anything from that particular game that anything took away or learned.
The return of Chris Woakes, I think, general point for the series, and a very good return of Chris Woakes, kind of top and tailing, which is a job that he can do. He is a very useful power play bowler, even in conditions where the ball isn't swinging. I think he's extremely useful, which has been an issue for England, taking power play wickets and keeping it tight in the power play. Frees up Archer to do some damage later in the innings. It means you don't have to spread Archer quite so thinly. And he does provide a batting option as well. The batting option of a 7 or 8 is limited in T20, but it's not. But it's not nothing. I think Sam Curran's development through this series, bowling outside of the power play. I know I'm going series rather than games because
that's fine. Yeah. I mean,
Sam Curran bowling.
I think it's best to review T20s in that way because the individual games are often, you don't learn that much from them. So carry on.
Sam Curran bowling outside the power play for the first time in a while, bowling his 4. I know it was in a situation where Sri Lanka were never going to win that game, but he did it and did the job quite well. David Willey returning and being able to move the ball both ways, which is something we saw against Ireland last year. England have a lot more competition now than they did, I think, with Owen Morgan's now officially name-checked Tamal Mills as someone who they might be looking at. And while David Malan, I don't want to say answered his critics, but certainly, reminded everyone that he can actually score a little bit quicker at the start. The one, I think, of England's first choice T20 players who's vulnerable now is Chris Jordan.
Yeah,
I think with that. There is a growing body of evidence that suggests that Chris Jordan is probably the worst of the regular England T20 players. I don't know if there's enough time between now and the T20 World Cup this year for him to be dislodged. But I will have to say I was impressed by a few of the names you just mentioned. I was particularly impressed by Chris Woakes. And Max, I don't know if you were in Wales, how much you saw of, I know you've seen the highlights and stuff, but of the individual deliveries bowled. Chris Woakes has developed some kind of knuckleball, but it differs a bit to a lot of other people's knuckleballs in that he gives it some backspin, so it swings as well as dips. And it was noticeable how difficult the Sri Lanka batters...
It looks like an off-spinner's arm ball.
Yeah, that is a good...
It slowly drifts away from the right-hander.
He's been spending time with Ravi.
Yeah, it's a really tricky... the batters were really struggling to pick it up. Now, I think time will tell whether that ball is as good as it looked against some of these Sri Lanka players. Whether that's because of the relative difference in quality, or whether that is actually as hard to pick up as it looked. But if it is, then he can bowl that every other ball and he'll cause people trouble because it looks very similar to his quicker delivery, except it sort of, plummets about halfway down the wicket, or 2/3 of the way down the wicket. Should we move on to the second T20? We'll recap that and talk about some other talking points.
Yep. So game two, Sri Lanka probably put up the biggest fight of the entire series in game two, but well, with the ball at least, there was something to shout about. On the batting side, Sri Lanka batting first again. Only the two Kusals, Pereira and Mendes, really threatened the scorers, and Sri Lanka sort of limped their way to a meagre 111 for 7 from their 20, and only again Chris Jordan going over 7 and over from the England bowlers.
Udana hit 17 off the last over, bowled by Chris Jordan.
More evidence. There's more evidence in the bag.
Well, Chris Jordan's been a very good T20 bowler for England. Again, a little bit like Milan, as has been talked about. He's never really replicated that for anyone else, which is a bit curious. And his numbers have been going in the wrong direction at the death for a little while. And
yeah, perhaps it's a case of people working him out a bit, or that sort of the experience of the IPL and playing against a wider crop of players perhaps has resulted in people getting to grips with them a bit.
I've got a theory that Max, you want to finish the summary of the game and then I'll explain my Chris Jordan theory.
Yeah,
just
sure.
To maintain the flow, feng shui of the episode.
Yeah, the halfway point, we're questioning Chris Jordan, and it's 111 for 7 from 20 for Sri Lanka. England coming out to bat. Sri Lanka took 2 quick hits through Chamira and Fernando, and then Hasaranga put the wobble on, and England was soon 36 for 4, and it looked like there might be a bit of a sniff for Sri Lanka to take an unlikely win, but Livingston and Billings calmed things down admirably and took England in sight of victory, and Sam Curran finished the job with a lovely 6 deposited into the stand. But yeah, back to your theory on Chris Jordan.
So I think batting at the death in T20 cricket is probably cricket's best example of how or T20's best example of how the battle between bat and ball evolves and can evolve quite quickly. And that I think sort of 5 years ago, Chris Jordan was very close to what you would want from an ideal death bowler, somebody who could bowl a consistent Yorker, could bowl a reasonably quick short delivery, and had a slower ball. Now, the games could develop quite rapidly in that if they're your 3 deliveries, well, people will stand deeper in their crease. If they, which gives them an option back down the ground. If they expect you to bowl, not that many slower balls, they'll look to play you fine, past fine leg or past third man. And I don't know if Chris Jordan's, range of variations compared to some of the contemporary elite death bowlers quite holds up at this point. I'm not sure Yorker bouncer length ball, mainly at sort of 85 miles an hour, is quite what you want from a modern T20 bowler.
That's the other part of it, and this isn't so much. There's nothing Chris Jordan can do about this. He's not as quick as some of the other elite bouncer Yorker hard length bowlers. He's not as quick as Archer or Bumrah or
Tymal Mills.
Tymal Mills, Mitchell Starc when he plays T20s. Rabada when he's at his best is a really good death bowler. He's not in that. He doesn't have that ability to. His hard length doesn't skip and hurry batters in the same way that those guys do. His Yorker gives you just that little bit more time. And it means that his room for error is a lot smaller. So you'll sometimes see bowlers. Bumrah's a good example of this. He'll quite often miss his Yorker long, but it's coming in so quickly that he gives himself a little bit more to work with. Whereas Jordan is that little bit easier to either go deep or to work over short fine and short third, or to back away and carve over the offside, and so he has to absolutely nail the Yorker.
Yes. This kind of leads on to another point that I sort of wanted to raise with regard to Sri Lanka in terms of how they batted and how they didn't do very well at that. There's a broader point here about boundary percentage, which we can go into a little bit. But if we're talking about technique,
I forgot to mention, it took them 7.4 overs to hit a boundary in that innings.
Yeah, it wasn't great, was it? I think it was the first time in 118 matches in England or something like that there hasn't been a boundary in the power play. Or in the last 118 T20s in England. It's a mad length of time.
And they didn't really... And it wasn't like... I mean, we'll come on to the hilarity of the third T20, but it wasn't like they even really tried to hit any boundaries.
No, yes, but so there is this problem. But I thought watching them bat against everyone that sort of wasn't Chris Jordan, that they had a plan for how people bowled in T20 cricket about 5 years ago, in that they kept trying to do things like paddle sweeps or scoops. And that is not an effective plan when a bowler is bowling, 60, 70% slower balls, because the ball doesn't have the pace on it for you to scoop. It's one of the reasons, if you watch AB de Villiers bat now versus 5 years ago, you see a lot less, scooping and reverse hitting, or he uses the third behind square either side, but
also
directly behind.
People have stopped bowling straight Yorkers at AB de Villiers.
Well, this is a development that's happened across cricket as well. It's not just AB de Villiers that people don't bowl that to. It's because they know that that's an option for basically any batter with eyes. It's not a hard shot to execute. It might be high risk, but it's also very high reward. So bowlers now, you see a lot more length balls bowled at 65 miles an hour, and trying to sweep that or play that fine if you're a batter off a pace bowler is ineffective. Pointless. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and then in the middle overs, Mark Wood was again brilliant in the middle overs. And I think that has to be his niche, and I think this is what England are working towards. Almost all of the other bowlers, like Rashid will bowl almost anywhere in the innings at this point. He's that good. Archer can bowl almost anywhere else in the innings. Wokes will probably top and tail. Willie will mostly bowl in the power play. Sam Curran will mostly bowl in the power play. Wood will mostly bowl in the middle. And he's really good at it because he smashes that length at a pace that even very good players struggle to set themselves against.
Yeah, he is good at it. He is very good at it. The middle over enforcer, I believe, is what we're supposed to call that. Max, was there anything else from this second T20 that we should talk about? What have we done? We've done Chris Jordan might not be good at death bowling.
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about the options that England have got. I feel like maybe we should try and salvage some positivity from a Sri Lankan point of view, and that they very much are struggling with the bat. But with the ball, there are some positive signs, I think, for them. Chimera, at least in the power play, he sort of struggled a bit when he came back to bowl towards the end of England's chase. But at the power play, he bowled quick. He had good pace. He looked dangerous. And Hasaranga, who's sort of one of the shining lights coming through in Sri Lankan cricket. England struggled, I think, and you sort of could tell that he.
A word for Benura,
someone that we were trying to see off a bit.
A word for Benura Fernando as well.
Yep.
Very tall, 6'6", 6'7", left armour, moves the ball in, did best up on the inside edge.
Yeah, lovely.
Which is a really good delivery, targeted that very well, and does look awkward to get away because he gets it sort of up into that hip region. Bowl well in the third T20 as well.
Doesn't he have the record bowling figures in a T20 international in England now? 4 for 17. I think he.
That'll be Chamir.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry.
And the record figures for a Sri Lankan in T20 not called Malinga.
That's good as well.
Which basically for a normal human.
Yeah, I was really impressed with Sri Lanka's bowling for pretty much the whole series, even in the final match, where they went around the park a little bit. They still had,
wasn't it?
They still had large parts of the game where they were kind of doing well, and three of their 5 bowlers or 6 bowlers bowled well.
Yeah, Sandakan bowled well in the third T20. They mostly looked like they knew what they were trying to do.
And the problem I thought that they had the whole way through, and it was mostly exposed in this second match, was that they just don't try and hit boundaries, and that's really dumb in T20 cricket. They hit 6 in 120 balls. Max, off the top of your head, what's the boundary percentage for that?
Low.
It's low. I think it's 5% across the whole series.
Sounds right.
Across the whole series, they managed a total of 23 boundaries, which is a boundary percentage figure of 6.5%.
That's bad.
Yeah. Now, average for a good player, and this is using metrics from about from the 2019 IPL, 18%. So batters that are striking a boundary, 18% of the balls they face, that's a good barometer for measuring whether they'll consistently be able to strike at over about 140. In fact, in that IPL, there were only 2 batters who struck boundaries less frequently that were able to do that. I don't know if either of you can guess 1 or 2 of those.
Kohli?
No, not Kohli.
So that's roughly a boundary every 5 balls, is that?
Yeah, it's 5.5 balls. But the two were Sanju Samson and Kane Williamson, and they are only just about getting their strike rate above that threshold. It's basically the best indicator if you want to go a level beyond, just strike rate. You should look for who's hitting a lot of boundaries in your analysis, and Sri Lanka just aren't. They bowled very effectively, and just to highlight this, how well they bowled, they managed to limit England's boundary percentage to just 14.6%. So the entire England team was struggling against this Sri Lanka bowling lineup. Now, I know a couple of the pitches were a little bit dodgy, and that might factor into why the stats are slightly suppressed for everyone here. But you can see there that their bowling is actually pretty good. I don't know enough about the Sri Lankan domestic scene or the Sri Lankan backup pool of players to say they need to pick these guys. But I think we can see from, basically the last three matches that the guys they've got at least playing the way they're being told to play or the way that they are playing aren't going to get their boundary percentage up anywhere near that 18% threshold.
We saw this in the third T20. They tried. They swung their arse off every single ball pretty much. And it was hilarious. They were barely making contact with anything. So it is an odd situation for them to be in. And you see this with developing teams sometimes, is that when they try and move beyond that comfort zone, they simply aren't skilled enough at doing it against good bowling. And that was probably a bit of an outlier. It's not going to go that wrong that often for an entire innings very often.
So, one of Dan Weston's things, who often comes on this show, is that when batters step up a level, they're often able to maintain a similar strike rate, they're often able to hit the same number of boundaries, but they just get out more frequently. I would theorize, based on what I saw, that these batters are not able to hit boundaries frequently enough to ever be a threat. And I think, look, what the team Sri Lanka have got at the moment against teams that aren't England, well, and let's be honest, the ball was moving around a little bit more than usual in some of those T20s. They will lose not disgracefully, and probably keep some people in their jobs. But I think if you're going to be a bit more ambitious about that, you're better off taking a high risk strategy, being a little bit unorthodox, and picking a team that are going to explode one way or the other.
I heard Mickey Arthur has said, so they dropped a couple of players before they dropped Angelo Matthews and Dinesh Chandamal, neither of whom are massive boundary hitters, but both of whom do have experience of winning T20 games and indeed World Cups. I think in both cases were part of that the team, although I think Angelo Matthews dropped himself for the final of that tournament that they won. So they're trying to build a group of younger players who they can build up as a squad, which probably means they've essentially written off this T20 World Cup and are looking through future cycles, which is fine. And they're trying to upskill these players and basically rely on a good bowling attack. The problem is, I was having this conversation with Dan Weston. They've sort of got a strategy where you need to have either very slow pitches or an outrageously good attack to pull off going at scoring 120, 130 is about your peak.
And wouldn't you also want to bowl first?
Probably.
I mean, with a team that you've got, which clearly doesn't have the power to put on a big challenging score up front, you want to try and maximise what you've got, which is your bowling attack, and try and get the other team down to a score that might be manageable, and just get there playing proper cricket shots.
I can see it on a slower pitch where you might want to bat first and eke out 130 or 125. And then strangle on a slow pitch, which might work towards the latter stages of the T20 World Cup. The problem is, I think it's not a given that they get out of that T20 group. To be honest, they're in a group with Ireland, who I think are a better T20 team than Sri Lanka right now. Look at Sterling, look at O'Brien. They've got some really good all-rounders. Delaney is a really good leg spinning all-rounder. Curtis Campher's a good player. Mark Adair. Josh Little's a good fast bowler. Simi Singh, Dockrell and Andy McBride, good spinning all-rounders. They're a pretty solid T20, kind of lower middle T20 team, Ireland. Oman, who'll be playing a few of their games at home, and Papua New Guinea, who are pretty well organised. It's not a given they get out of that group and get to play on very slow pitches. And then against a lot of teams, they'll likely... I mean, it's Sri Lanka and chaos reigns, so who knows, but everything has to go right, and even then they might still not compete. Now, maybe this is a development project for a few years down the line, but recent Sri Lankan history says that coaching setups don't get time to do that.
Yes. Shall we talk quickly about the third T20? Because we've been talking about this series for a little while, and there's a little bit of blast and stuff that we do want to get to without the show being forever long. So in the final match, Sri Lanka won the toss again, and this time they decided they would bowl first. And I think we sort of saw why maybe they were reluctant to do that earlier in the series. As well, after actually quite an average power play, England opened up and managed to make it to 105 before they lost their first wicket in the 12th over of the game. The back half of the innings was a little bit less fluent. England's run scoring was very top heavy, with both openers getting 50 and the next best score being 14. But they never really completely lost momentum and ended up on 180 for 6 at the close of the first innings. And that proved to be way too much for Sri Lanka, who collapsed. And we're out for 41. Not 41, we're all out for 91. 41. Nines and fours do look very similar. But they made it to 91. The main thing I remember from this innings, and Nakul, you sort of touched upon this, was that Sri Lanka, they played more air shots than Max on the golf course.
There was, I think it was Ashana Fernando at one point had a control rating after about 10 balls of 30%.
The entire Sri Lanka team, the Cricketers did one of their tweets about this. They had a 63.3% for false shot percentage in the first 10 overs. Which means they're actually only in control of where the ball's going 35% of the time. It was pretty ugly, to be honest. Like, astonishingly ugly, to be honest.
I mean, you can credit them for showing intent, and they weren't going to get to 180 prodding, even if it had worked. So,
yes.
I do feel a bit sorry for Casal Pereira and for Mickey Arthur in that sense, because they said at the start of the series they wanted to try and play with some intent, but they played quite fearfully in the first 2 games. They got rid of the fear, but forgot to add the hitting the ball in the third T20. And, maybe even if we don't really know whether if they'd played up to their ability, whether they'd have got to 180 against a pretty good England team that might not have completely sacked off the last 5 overs, which is essentially what they did. Like Adil Rashid was bowling bouncers at one stage. He bowled a cross-seam bouncer at 70 miles an hour at one stage.
They didn't even bowl to the 19th over of the game. I mean, England would just sort of testing things out.
Wasn't that one of your developments, Jack? The spinning
bouncer. I've got quite a good record with the spinning bouncer. But the intentional spinning bouncer.
This wasn't a spinning bouncer. This was a sort of Ravi Bopara sort of seam up delivery, or cross seamer. It was pretty ugly. And a few of those wickets were a little bit cheap. I will say Willie and Wokes bowled really well up front, and bowled kind of taking out of the equation what was happening at the other end. But in terms of their planning, in terms of where they wanted to, the lines and lengths they wanted to hit, bowled really well, I think. And there's something to like there. And Sam Curran in the middle as well, bowl very nicely. For England, I mean, Dawood Malan actually starting his charge a bit earlier was something that was good to see. He also did well against Wanindu Hasaranga. It kind of took down Hasaranga, really.
He got a couple of overs, Hasaranga, didn't he? It was a little bit too expensive.
3 overs, none for 40. 3 overs, none for 42. With Bairstow and particularly Malan severe on him. And Malan against spin is something that is a weakness of his, but he used that matchup of the leg spinner hitting into him really well, and powered England to a total even in third or fourth, even in third gear really, that was way too high probably for Sri Lanka, and was probably about par for that wicket. We can't really read. Bairstow took a little bit of time to get going and then got out just as he was trying to get going. Asuru Udana looked really good when he was bowling the Yorker and awful when he was bowling anything else.
Yes.
And again,
that's an accurate description of
and again,
Udana's bowling.
Chamira and Benura Fernando were looked pretty useful. I mean, a couple of Chamira's wickets were a little bit cheap at the end, but you still got to get them. And Sandakan bowl well. Like, Sri Lanka have an attack that they can stay competitive with. It's how they go about getting enough runs, because they've tried 2 different ways in this series and it didn't work either way.
Right. Shall we really quickly just talk about what's going to happen next for these two teams? They are going to play a I think it's 3-match ODI series starting tomorrow. The main news from that, and we'll cover it as we kind of go through, we're not going to really do a preview. The main news from that, Nakul, is that 3 of the Sri Lanka players have been sent home because they went out for a midnight smoke. And it looked a little bit like they might have had a midnight drink as well.
Yeah, I joked on Twitter, did they go to Clute? I don't know what that means to anyone who hasn't visited Durham, but if you know, you'll know. So yeah, Danush Gunatilaka, Kusal Mendis, who was the vice-captain, and Niroshan Dikwella, who stretched the limits of vibes a bit too far. The Sri Lankan keeper were caught. I think Kusal and Dikwella were seen on video that some weirdo in a car just driving past them filmed them and put it on Twitter. A little bit odd. I don't know if he knew where they were going to be or what that was. Apparently, the Sri Lankan authorities weren't aware of it till they saw the video, but once they were, they didn't really have any choice but to send the 3 of them home. They were specifically told not to go out in Durham, having been allowed to go out a bit for a coffee and something in Cardiff because of the COVID rates in Durham. These guys did. In bubble life, and they're on tour without contracts. We shouldn't forget that. Can understand, but it's a really stupid thing to do. A couple of these guys had previous. Dikweller's offences are, fairly minor. It's a send-off here and whatnot. Kusal Mendis drove a car that was involved in a hit and run, basically. He hit a cyclist who later died and was released on bail. Nothing really happened with that. And Gunatilaka, it's always a good sign in a sense, well, certainly for a podcast, when someone has a disciplinary issues section on their Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
It ranges from the fairly banal, a couple of send-offs here, to breaching of curfew during a test series in South Africa against South Africa.
Turned up to one game without kit.
Turned up to a game without kit.
Pretty poor for an international cricketer.
I don't quite know how that happens, to be honest. Turned up to a game without kit, didn't participate properly in training sessions, showed indifferent
We're wondering why Sri Lanka are struggling with their batting.
Showed indifferent attitude during training sessions and was suspended for 6 games. I think that was certainly the year of his test debut. I think he was a little bit more experienced in T20 and one-day international cricket. And then more seriously, he was questioned in connection with an alleged rape that happened in his room at the team hotel in a series against South Africa. His story was that he was asleep while it happened. A friend of his, who was invited back to the team hotel with a woman. He, as far as I know, his story of that he was asleep and didn't know that it was happening is true, and that's as far as it's gone legally. I don't know anything else to contravene that, but it's, to say the least, not a good look.
No.
And he was involved in a restaurant / hotel, kind of a restaurant hotel brawl earlier this year.
It's a checkered history.
Yeah, and this is quite impressive given that he's he's 30. Okay, so he's had a little bit of time.
Yeah.
But he was asked to attend mandatory counselling and alcohol use sessions by a doctor nominated by Sri Lanka Cricket. But then he asked Sri Lanka Cricket to intervene in quote unquote false allegations. So a lot has happened to, and a lot has been done by Danushka Gunatilaka, and with Avishka Fernando, who has actually done quite well in his limited one-day international career so far, scored a couple of hundreds, including in England at the World Cup. He tore a quad muscle during the T20 series, and so is out. Sri Lanka have lost, within a period of about 24 to 36 hours, 4 of their potential top 6.
Yeah.
Well, they weren't doing very well, so...
No, exactly.
Get some new guys in and see what happens.
Let's wrap up part 1 of this week's cricket podcast then, with the news of those fellas being sent home. Quick reminder, you can find us at The Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. You should like and follow and leave a comment, do whatever. Leave us a review on iTunes. Go on Spotify, hit follow there as well. And head over to our Patreon, patreon.com/the cricket pod. Help us get to unlucky number 13. We'll be back after a pretty short break.
Welcome back to the Cricket Podcast. Just a reminder to find us at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And having been over England's international T20 cricket, we are now moving on with our T20. What is it? A T20 Bonanza. Extravaganza.
The Cricket Podcast Premier League.
Yes, TCPPL. All the answers of T20 cricket. We're going domestic, and it's time to round up what's been happening in the T20 Blast. We're just over halfway through the group stages, so things are starting to shape up quite nicely. And so far, I would say the take-home message is that it's been an advert for playing cricket in the north. If anyone, has been paying attention, it's on track to be the wettest South Group on record. So far, 8 of the 37 fixtures have been rained off. That's an abandonment rate of 22%, which is, as I said, on track to be the wettest South Group ever. Anyone wondering, wettest ever group in T20 cricket in England was the 2007 North Group, where 10 of the 24 games produced no result, which is absolutely staggering.
There was certainly... I grew up in Hull and was kind of still there around that time. Certainly, there was really heavy rain and flooding, and the drains basically all flooded in various parts of Yorkshire in the north, and the various rivers overflew their banks.
So.
I love cricket in England. Cricket in England's got a stat about the wettest T20 group. I mean, you don't get that in the IPL, do you?
Cricket in England doesn't have a stat about the wettest T20 group until this afternoon when I went through every group stage of the T20 cricket in England.
Elite level analytics.
Hashtag floodviz.
Yeah. We're carving out a new niche. That's the rain. As for the cricket that has been played, the holders, Notts, they're looking quite good again. But let's go back to more niche stats. They've tied 3 games out of 9, which is absolutely ridiculous.
That's phenomenal.
And the last team to tie 3 games was Northampton 2010, but that was in 16. So there is plenty of time left for Notts to surpass that. I won't really go through all the teams that are doing well and who's looking good, because you can just look at the T20 Blast table. That'll give you a bit of an idea. But I will give you a couple of special mentions. One for Sussex, who, back to the rain again, have had half of their games abandoned. And have only actually batted a total of 67.4 overs.
Including one abandoned when they'd technically already won.
Yes, against Surrey, so I'm very happy that happened. I think they needed 37 on DLS to after 5 overs to win. They were on 42 for 1, and it was called off after 4 overs and 5 balls. And heavy rain came down.
They couldn't just be like, you've got to bowl that last ball.
Yeah, well...
even if they hadn't, I saw Bertus de Jong, who's Crick Buzz's associate editor or main writer, pointed out that actually Duckworth and Lewis themselves said this is a misapplication of the regulations. That actually, if a team has already won, because this isn't a par score, effectively it's a target.
Yeah.
By that point, effectively it's a target. So what should happen? What should happen is they essentially, they should have already won. Now, this is not the first time that this has happened. Australia got hilariously knocked out of the 2017 Champions Trophy in the same way with a game against, I think it was a game against Pakistan that they had technically already achieved the target but couldn't get back out in time. We all know what happened with Pakistan, and it's happened a couple of times before.
Just for the avoidance of doubt here, if someone loses a wicket, does the target not change? So
the runs needed depends on how many wickets you've lost. So it's a possibility.
Or did they know?
I don't think an extra wicket would have changed how many runs Sussex needed in this case. But I'd say perhaps the target, could kind of depend on the number of wickets.
No, because what happened was the rain came while there hadn't been an interruption up until that point. So at that point, they were still chasing 176. It was worked out that the DLS pass score, even for the DLS target, had they got back on at that point. So you're not talking a pass score, you're talking the target based on what has already happened, was 37. They were on 43. So the wickets lost is completely irrelevant.
There we are, Max. Surrey should have lost.
Yep, and they didn't. So up there, Monterey. Sussex, unfortunate. That's the take home there. Middlesex, on the other hand, just bad. They've actually batted all right, but they've conceded far more runs than any other team in the South Group, and at the worst economy rate in the entire competition at 9.25.
And have somehow not had a game rained off yet, which might be points.
What's happening? The microclimate at Lords is holding strong. But yeah, I mean, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage if every game you go out there and you need to chase 180, 190 to win. It's not ideal. Well, that's the teams themselves. I think it's probably worth having a look at the individual performers because we've got the spectre of the T20 World Cup on the horizon. So maybe a little look at some of the players
And the 100 bonus draft.
And the 100 bonus draft, yeah.
Yeah.
But there are a few potentials for the 100 bonus draft, but we'll start with some of the more well-known figures. And this is perhaps an opportunity for some contrived debate, which we like. Alex Hales has been batting really well. He scored 335 runs.
Ding!
An average of 55 and a strike rate of 172. So, should we have him in the England squad? What do you reckon?
Oh, God, this is the modern-day equivalent of the Kevin Peterson debate from 2013-14, isn't it? Oh, God.
It was asked on Twitter. Peter Holt asked us this on Twitter.
Yeah,
so we're ticking one of our questions.
Of course he did. What more do you want me to say? Yes, he's really good and on merit in terms of as a cricket robot with his numbers should be in the England team. Yeah. As a person, Owen Morgan doesn't trust him.
I think Hales is going to be the end of Morgan. That's what I think is going to happen.
I think Morgan's going to be the end of Morgan.
I think Morgan's partly that, but I think Morgan not picking Hales, England losing the next T20 World Cup and people being able to blame it on that. Plus Morgan being a bit rubbish, plus Morgan saying some weird stuff and kind of losing some of the gloss that he had.
So I think that's one of the arguments people have put forward, isn't it? It's like the original thing I think that Morgan said about Hales not making it into the team was sort of disrupting the squad harmony and that kind of argument. And then, all this stuff's come out about historic Twitter allegations and that kind of thing. And people have, it's naturally resulted in a little bit of whataboutism. I think for me, the issue is that if you're going to go down a route and say Alex Hales isn't going to play for England because he did X, Y, Z, just say that, and you might cause a bit more of a furore at the time and be like, well, that's just, that's whatever you think about that, whether you think that's over the top or not. But it stops this constant rumbling of oh, well, you said it was about squad harmony, and now, you've all done this, so what about this? When
well,
actually we don't think he should play, and
even if we're going to take that, I don't think what Morgan has said on Twitter in his ridiculous non-defense of it. I don't think that disrupts squad harmony. It's not a good look, and it paints him in a not very good light. It's out of the. It's a pretty baffling non-apology, and a worrying lack of introspection, and a worrying lack of awareness of how it could make people feel towards him and the England team, and just in general. But Alex Hales had clearly lost the trust of the England team. I think that much was fairly obvious, and through his behaviour through the Ben Stokes incident, the fact that they found out about that through the papers, I think that didn't help. There is the sense that they'd been, going to bat for him and kind of covering for him because of his ability, and then they had a ready-made replacement in Johnny Bairstow. So they didn't need to stick with Hales in the way they might have done with some other players. Now we've seen a little bit of a rapprochement. Hales has spoken to, or Hales' agent certainly has spoken to Morgan and Ashley Giles. There is the talk that it's not a complete no-no. I don't think he'll come back for this World Cup. Maybe for the next one. Who knows? But I honestly, I don't really think it's worth talking about until he's, he'll be back in a squad at some point. I'm sure of that, and we'll talk about it then. In a sense, I mean, in terms of players who, again, probably won't make this squad. I think certainly the the standout for me among the batters is Will Jacks.
Yes, correct answer.
He's not top of the run scoring charts, but the aura that he's created, along with Glenn Phillips, who obviously isn't England, is a New Zealander, but the aura that he's got around him, Will Jackson, his ability to hit sixes to any part of the ground, seemingly. I mean, he's striking at 180 runs per 100 balls, which is pretty remarkable, really.
Yeah, it's freakish. Yeah, Max, who else should we be looking out for? So we've got Jacks, we've got Hales on our list.
We can have another another dive into the box of England players involved in slight controversy, but we could sort of just move on from that. So we got some young guys who are looking. I mean, again, probably not going to make the squads, but Sam Cook at Essex has bowled pretty well. He's got. He's been taking a bunch of wickets. George Scrimshaw's taken 14 wickets in 8 games at a pretty tight economy rate, just over 7. Also, not English, but I think we should mention him just because of Dan Weston. Naveen ul Haq, joint top of the wickets charts with Carlos Brathwaite and Logan van Beek. So he's 21-year-old Afghan. I think Dan Weston might have mentioned him. I don't know if on the pod, if not on the podcast, certainly to us.
Isn't Dan working with Leicestershire?
Yes, yeah. So he has mentioned him before.
Logan van Beek. Watch out for the Netherlands pace attack at this year's T20 World Cup. Logan van Beek is a pretty good bowler and might not actually get into the Netherlands first 11. They've got a lot of fast bowlers. Shane Snater, Fred Klaassen, Brandon Glover, who's a really exciting prospect.
Well, a delayed answer to Jack's first question about one of the what do you like about T20? The fact that the Netherlands can beat England. You can have games like that. You don't get that in Test cricket so much. You know, like we nearly saw it with Ireland, but it was just ultimately.
Well, and also the Netherlands. That was a slightly freakish with a not very good England team. The Netherlands are genuinely a pretty good team. Scotland as well, actually. They're in the same group in the qualifier and up against Bangladesh, maybe.
So I think things are looking exciting in the domestic game.
Well, we'll keep our eye on that. Just to wrap up this show, I wanted to talk very briefly because there's some other T20 cricket going on in the world about South Africa v West Indies in West Indies. Obviously, the West Indies lost the 2 Test series, and Heinrich Nortje is the best bowler of all time, but. We did expect in the T20s that the story would be slightly different and that the West Indies would be a lot more competitive. And so it has been. The series is currently poised at 1-1. The West Indies, it's good to see have got basically their best team out, I think. And in the first match they fired. They chased down 160 in 15 overs for loss of just 2 wickets. Evan Lewis, the unlikely hero with 71 off 35. And then in the second match, South Africa fought back in a way that you don't traditionally associate with South Africa. And their spinners were really quite good through the middle overs of that game, putting the squeeze on the talented West Indies batting lineup to help South Africa defend 166. And we haven't got absolutely ages to go into details here on either of them. But I am interested to hear your thoughts, Max or Nakul, whoever wants to dive in, on where you think these two might fall with respect to the T20 World Cup later this year.
We know that if the West Indies fire with the bat, they basically can't be stopped. Shimron Hetmeyer can't even get into this team, and they're still powering through against a good. Not an elite T20 bowling attack, but still a good attack. George Linder's a decent power play spinner. Rabada, Nortje, and Gidi. Tabraiz Shamsi's a decent spinner, and they were frankly cannon fodder against Lewis and Gale and Dre Ross in the first game. Pooran and Pollard didn't even have to bat. There's a lot of upside. I mean, we not really expecting Spiceman Andre Fletcher to play in the T20 World Cup. This seemed to be a bit of a hometown pick. He's from Grenada. They were playing in Grenada. Narayan's not available, so they picked him. I mean, it is pretty much their first choice team. I think maybe Fidel Edwards will be someone who they'll have a look at for the T20 World Cup. He in the CPL last year was bowling really well on some really slow pitches. Kind of took the pitch out of the equation. And has lost none of his pace and fire. Narayan will obviously come back into the equation as well as an option. And Hetmeyer, I think, particularly is a very good spin hitter, as we all know. For South Africa, their kind of 160 or so batting first seems to be about their peak. They've got some good but not elite T20 batters. It doesn't look like AB will be coming back for that World Cup. It's possible. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Miller has been a fabulous player, but is clearly slowing down. Rossi van der Dussen is a good player, but can only do so much. Bavuma is potentially useful in the power play, and Quinton de Kock is good, but not elite. And then they've got. I think they'll be a bit more solid and a bit less of a shambles than they were at the 2019 50 over World Cup, but I wouldn't expect them to be challenging for honours.
Max, have you got anything you'd like to add there? I mean, are either of them a dark horse at least for you?
I think that's probably fair. I can't see South Africa as a dark horse to win it. I think they will have a couple of days where they beat a team that you would expect them not to. They'd have because they've got the players in there who can do something. I'm thinking Rabada and Nortje could just break a game open on their own, and and on the other side of things, de Kock up the order could do the same. So I think South Africa will definitely be a dangerous team for people to face, but I can't see them carrying that through the tournament.
And they also don't really have a sixth bowler that they trust.
Yeah.
Which is why we ended up with Reza Hendricks bowling his first ever over in a T20 match to a set Chris Gale.
West Indies, on the other hand, that's a Galactico lineup, isn't it?
Well, I think both teams have got a chance for slightly different reasons. I think the West Indies, their potentially the thing that derails them is fitness. To be honest, with a lot of those players reasonably old and reasonably injury prone, but I mean, I guess there are also some questions around the bowling. But generally speaking, to go back to earlier in the show, if you just smash loads of boundaries, that's the best way to that's the best tactic in T20 cricket. And that sounds dumb as hell saying it like that. But what I mean is if you're looking at building a team, what one thing do you want to prioritize going into a T20 World Cup? Basically, it's the ability to hit fours and sixes at a higher rate than anyone else. You don't really need to worry about your bowling so much, because if you have a batting order like they have, there's virtually any score is gettable, and you'll just hit teams out of competitions.
And this T20 World Cup is likely to be played on tired UAE pitch,
back against the slow pitch thing. Trying to get Kieran Pollard away on those pitches.
Well, yeah, and they've got decent, even without Narine, Fabian Allen and Hayden Walsh are both fairly tidy spin bowlers. And Narine can be unplayable on slow pitches at times. If he's not going to take many wickets, he'll not go for many runs. I mean, the worry is the batting on slower pitches against spin, which Hetmeyer solves to some extent. Purin will come good at some point. He's not in a great run of form in international cricket, but he'll come good at some point. He's too good a player not to. Pollard is a great hitter of spin as well. So, and they've got depth. Lendl Simmons isn't in this team currently at the moment. He'll be in and around there. So, I don't know if they're dark horses. In fact, I mean, they're in the conversation with England. They're in the conversation with England, India, and New Zealand for winning it.
Well, Nakul's going to step further there. We had a few questions through on Twitter. We've done about an hour now, so we're not going to do them now, but I'll go through and just send everyone a tweet. So you'll get a personalised response from the Cricket Podcast over there.
Not necessarily agreed with by all members.
Yes, it'll be Jack's thoughts on whatever you've submitted. So sorry we weren't able to do a dedicated questions, but I did want to do that. But also we want to keep the show to a manageable length. Nakul, thanks for joining us. Can you let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, cheers. I am at Nakul M Pande, Nakul Mpande on Twitter.
Great. Max, where can people find us?
They can find us at The Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also find us on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, etc., etc.
Yeah, leave us a comment. Let us know where the West Indies are dark horses or whether they are certifiable favourites. The other one. What's the one above dark horses?
Contenders?
Contenders, yeah. All right, on that note, we will call it a day on the Cricket Podcast. Thank you very much for listening or watching.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.